I'd been pastoring the church here in Somerset West from about 87. The Lord began to speak to me in 93, very clearly, very powerfully. And I let him talk to me for 9 months. And he gave me various aspects of leaving denominationalism. In November of that year, at an elders meeting in my house, I decided this is it. I got up and said, gentlemen, I must leave the Full Gospel Church of God and get into non-denominational movement. And then the chief elder piped up and he said, Vic, what we've been praying for 9 months, the Lord told us that we've got to get out the church. Well, you could have knocked me down with a feather. And we decided there and then, as soon as we can, we will be out.
We were about, I don't know, about 400 or so, 450. We voted as a church. There was no nonsense at the polls, if you know what I mean. And that was how we left this building and everything that was in it. So it was a challenge. But there was an amazing spirit of adventure and excitement and knowing that we were in the Lord's will and that He was going to see to everything, and we trusted Him, we trusted Vic, and we trusted the elders, and we just went for it. The school was delighted to have it. Evidently we were a positive influence there. Then we had to move from the hall, we had to go to the activity centre, then we went back to the hall. Vic particularly was very strong on teaching and doctrine and discipleship. Well, we laughed a lot, but I can't remember anything I can say now that's going to put Vic on the spot, and I'm very upset about that. I'm sure it'll come to me later.
Cornell and I joined NewGen in 1997. Actually was Abundant Life still then, and Rob Parkinson was leading. We really were connected into the church immediately, made amazing friends. But in that time was the transition of Tom coming from PE and taking over leadership. I actually worked for Tom, I worked for Pete, and I worked for Steph, and all three of these guys are amazing guys. They are passionate about God, they're passionate about His people.
When we came there, Rob Farquharson and Dave Scott were the elders leading the church. They invited us to come and lead Abundant Life, and when it's the Western Cape, you hear God quickly and clearly. So we moved down, and I do want to say that Rob Farquharson's humility in stepping aside so that I could be the lead guy there was just Jesus flavored all over. And he had a deep, deep love for the people here. He had such a deep hunger for them to have more and more of what Jesus had.
There was a lot of joy. We laughed often. Tom had the saying, friendship before function. And that's what he really came to establish in NewGen. We had a name change early on when he arrived.
The conversation around the name change was already happening. And I do want to say Abundant Life had an incredible history in this area. It had been around a long time. Many lives had been changed. There were many, many stories about the things that God had done through Abundant Life. And this moment came, and people were feeling there was a need for a name change. And so we started to dig into that. And that is why we have the name, or you have the name, New Generation Church. It just talked of a new day, a new season. And it talked about generation, not just one group of people, but generations.
Tom and Ina, they're awesome.
They love people, you can see that, and they love God. It's just been amazing to see their journey.
On one of the occasions when they visited, you and I had looked at each other and kind of said, if we ever have to move, and there was no thoughts in our head of moving, we think Pete and Jan may be the couple to come and take this.
Grace Church.
I think we've been leading Grace since 1991. And then there came a time where I think Pete had felt it for 3 years. He said that he felt God was saying we need to move on. And then the one day we'd heard that Tom and Una felt God calling them over to Australia.
And we knew without a doubt we needed to move to Australia, which was really tough for us, I want you to know. But we've learned over the years, you do what the King wants and all the rest will work out.
And then when Tom left and Pete joined, it felt like we were running at 100 miles per hour. Pete was he's a very strong leader, very courageous. He just gets up and gets going.
We joined NewGen in October 2006. I used to live with Pete in Pietermaritzburg. That's where I knew him from. Pete and Jan took me in really kindly as a student. I think one of the most helpful gifts that Pete gave me was an understanding of how important family are to leadership. And really, when you look at scripture, that's what qualifies us. We're not qualified because of any gifting or ability. We're qualified because of how we love each other and lead our kids and work in our marriage.
I know leadership training has always been
There
the
you go.
whole
Leadership.
training.
Yeah, he was just a very unique, very strong, very diligent and very hardworking. He was very good at equipping us to go to the nations. He opened up doors for many people to go into Madagascar, to go into Namibia, to take the gospel further than just our own boundaries.
Madagascar, what a life has been there. Awesome. And New York and the lot, England, and yeah, jeez.
In terms of a building, sometimes at Hottentots Holland we'd have a call saying, oh, you can't have church here today because the place would be an absolute tip or something had happened. And I think that was also part of the process too, of actually saying, okay, we actually need a home, but not something for ourselves, something that other people can use as well.
It kind of took almost 4 or 5 years of just letting this idea run through people's minds, and we talked about it a lot. And I said to him, Peter, I had this vision of this place where there's factories. I saw a sort of informal settlement across the road. I saw us reaching into an informal settlement. Don't know what it looks like, but there's this big grassy parking area, and kind of almost in my spiritual mind saw pretty much where we are today. And he said, that's crazy because that's where I want to take you. And we said, well, where are we going to get the money from? And he said, well, God will provide. As we floated the idea and the vision to the people in the church, just the generosity of our people responded to this far exceeded what the congregation had been able to do up until that stage. It was always going to be God, and it was always God in terms of how we got here.
I remember having lots and lots of prayer meetings for the building project, and God specifically saying, be bold and courageous.
Be bold.
And
Come on, church. Come on, church. Come on, church. Come on. Please, Lord. Please, Lord. And up and up and up and up. And finally, what a ride.
I want to bring some of the prophetic words God has spoken to us at New Generation Church. This covers a 9-year span. Some of them are in the process of being fulfilled. Others are yet to be fulfilled. As you all know, we've been blessed by this wonderful building here that God has provided for us, which was part of the prophetic words. And we are utilizing this building, I believe, in a greater measure day by day. We're having all different kinds of meetings. We're having weddings. The functions that are taking place, the training that's taking place is fantastic. And God has provided this building for us. And I believe that for all of these promises that we can all say yes, they are in Him, and they're amen in Jesus, and to be for the glory of God. And I would say to all of us, as these prophetic words are brought to us as a reminder, please do not take the Word of God lightly. He's called us to be those that would soar on wings like an eagle. You may see all the things in the nation going on, troubles and problems, and yet God has called us as a people to soar on wings like an eagle. He's called us to demonstrate God's power, His glory, and His love. And I believe this is taking place in a greater measure day by day in New Generation Church. He's putting new wings on us, a new heart and a new mind within us. He's renewing our strength. I believe He's calling us for gear changing in our lives, adjustments to make to bring us closer to Him to fulfill the promises He's given us. we're going to have favor in our community and the surrounding communities. What a wonderful thought when you think of what's happened in Stellenbosch and what's happening now in our surrounding areas.
So I found my way to NewGen back in 2001. I was a student in Stellenbosch, and I was looking for a church, and I just battled, and one day through some great circumstances I found my way in NewGen, Somerset West. That was when Tom was about to leave and just before Pete arrived. In my little Beetle, I drove from Stellenbosch as a student. I had to sacrifice some of my beer money to afford that. Obviously I wanted to subsidize that petrol, so I needed more people to come in the car and to subsidize it, and so very quickly we found Matt.
Steph invited me to church with him. I think he needed someone to push that Beetle of his. I really felt at home when I came to NewGen.
And then Matt and I turned into 3, turned into 4, and then very soon after that with Davy we started a little life group. There were several stories, several people that we had the privilege of seeing come to faith in those days. It was amazing. We decided we wanted a church there, so as a student group we started praying in the botanical gardens for a church plant one day.
The students, we were so passionate, and we had these early morning prayer meetings once a week, largely praying into the eventual birth of this church. And when I say early morning, I mean student days, it was
8:30, 9.
And so the sacrifice was significant.
Mark and Elna and Tennis with the steadies.
Yeah,
awesome.
I mean,
As an eldership team, we felt that there was a real calling for NewGen to be present in that city, to be making an impact there, and it was time that we planted an official site in Stellenbosch. Pete phoned me, as he always does, just off the cuff, and said he needs to see me. Didn't beat around the bush, and said, we're planting a church in Stellenbosch, I need you and Elna to lead it. So, like, after catching my breath, I went home and I said to Elna, sit down. Pete's asked us to lead a church plant in Stellenbosch. And I was expecting a lot of pushback, and she said, okay. And that was it. So if anyone has ever planted a church, the early days are probably the hardest. When I really saw God's hand moving was just how the capacity of people was being built. How more and more people just sort of put their hand in and did what they had to do to make things happen, to make the church a success.
when we know it wasn't easy for them, Mark's full-time work, to take on a community in Stellenbosch. And I remember the early days of Stellenbosch, going there in the early, when it was meeting in the afternoons, evenings, and we'd go and we'd have prayer meetings. And there'd be this small crowd, you know, and sometimes people would say, oh, is it ever going to grow? And now you look at it now and you think, oh Lord, thank you for your vision. Thank you for helping people persevere and not give up.
That's right.
Thank you for people like Mark and Elna who took on the responsibility, you know. When
After I led the church in Stellenbosch for about 2.5 years, I just really felt that Stellenbosch was getting to the point where it needed a dedicated person who could look after it. And so we did it quite quickly. Steph took it over, and it was like something that I never felt I would ever have the privilege of doing. And when I did it, it was such an incredible thing in my life. And then it feels like you're giving away something, you know, but it's not yours, it's God's.
So the Liberty story started 9 years ago. There was a need to reach out to the 18 to 24-year-olds. And so we planted a Liberty here in the refinery in 2009. And just an incredible moment of celebration as the church's first site plant after coming from the Abundant Life Days. There was great joy, great impact into the community. We saw incredible growth in those early days as Davy and Lee planted out, and just were really incredibly aware of what the culture needed and really impacted them in just such a beautiful way.
We remember fondly the days that Urban Liberty started. It was an idea that came up in a conversation with Peter Howard-Browne, an idea that was birthed from a desire to reach a generation that is not willing to just receive the faith of their parents, but wanting to deconstruct that faith, bring their doubts and their skepticism, and then build it up from the ground and see if it still stands. Our hope was to reach those people who who don't easily come to church, who aren't really interested in a normal Sunday morning expression of what church is. We sat around tables afterwards and we had meals together, and those meals were sacred moments, and lives became shared with one another in vulnerability and honesty. I remember the team that planted with us. They were just so willing to pay a heavy price, to put in long hours of sweat and tears for the sake of people engaging with God and His good news in that way. And we're so grateful for the team. We're grateful for Pete and the leaders that believed in the idea. We're grateful for those who paid the price along the way. And we're grateful for those who are carrying on the legacy.
So Davy and Lee were then called to New York, and they handed over to Steph and Kaz, and they then took Liberty into the future that God had for them. At that stage, Mark Tennant handed over to Steph and Kaz, who'd come from Liberty. So then there was a gap in Liberty, and Jared and Bron took over, and also just the incredible teaching gift that they brought into the community developed Liberty to be a more rounded community, and she just really was in such a great space. Pete then had a stroke in 2013, and so Jared and both Steph and Kaz from Stellenbosch stepped down from leading their congregations. And so we were in a space of trying to figure out what future God had for us.
So when Pete had his stroke, it's obviously a massive impact to any leadership team to have your lead guy be exposed to something like that.
Well, Doctor, you can...
He said there's 30% chance of survival.
Yeah, so come on, man. Really?
And Pete was busy trying to get out of bed, and they were trying to hold him down.
And was stroke and
gastric tube out.
Yes, and terrible. But God,
yeah, and everybody was praying.
And been to the Lord. Oh no.
Isn't that a funny part?
When we heard about it, we were like, oh, Pete will be back in a few weeks kind of thing. And I think by and large, the group of elders had the same kind of thought. And I think there was some great wisdom where we asked some external guys to get involved, particularly Rigby. Within the weekend of it happening, Rigby and Sue had met one-on-one with all the elders. So in those days, I think there were 17 couples, including Pete and Jan, and so it was a massive task. Rigby made it clear that Pete wasn't coming back, and we had to begin to grapple with that reality and what that looked like.
But then obviously the burning question was, so what now as the eldership team? And there was just a sense of patiently waiting for God to do what He needed to do in terms of who would step into Pete's shoes.
I started out at the church, as a gopher, I guess, doing everything that no one else really wanted to do, and then eventually coming and leading admin, and then doing the ops, and then leading Liberty, and then Stellenbosch, and in between all of that there's being on the sound team and leading the volunteer guys, and I've actually been exposed to a hang of a lot in the life of the church. And
in those years preceding what happened with Pete, there were so many changes, and we're moving house a zillion times, and I think we both felt quite frustrated, like we just want to settle somewhere and really dig in, and it's hard to leave people. Every time you leave a congregation, that's heartbreaking. But then to look back and see that actually God in His wisdom had given us such experience and had knitted us relationally with people in all of the congregations, and what we were frustrated in, actually, that was God in His sovereign wisdom being so kind to us, so that when we were called to take the reins, we were so well positioned and well rooted to do so.
I was just saying, God, if it's me, I don't feel like the man. But if it is me, you're going to have to speak to me, and you're going to have to make me the man for this job. At some point, Rigby came back and he said, it looks like there's an overwhelming sense that it's you and Kaz.
The church is never built on a man. The church is never built for a man. And so I think that understanding from the eldership team made the transition easy, but it didn't make what had happened to Pete any easier for us to deal with.
At the same time, the elders and the church is grieving, because we're seeing someone that we love fighting for his life. It feels horrid to be moving forward, and I remember Rigby saying to us, listen, Pete's my best mate, and let me speak on his behalf and tell you that if you guys don't move forward, and if you don't take this church where God wants you to take it to, Pete would want to kick your butt.
I've had to really fight the thing of what did we do wrong? You know, is it God now saying, okay, thanks for playing, but we know that God, you know, that God isn't like that in his character.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know? And so yeah, it has been, it definitely been a journey of coming to acceptance, coming to grips with the whole thing.
Yes.
I think for me, the other day I realized that actually I felt my heart's been broken by the whole, you know, when Pete had his stroke.
Shame, darling.
And no, it was a good revelation.
I know, but yeah.
And
walk in the park.
oh, Pete, you know.
I miss the guys, Steph. I miss lots. Yes, but anyway, it's life. Preaching, yes. I'll be back. I'll be back, and step by step, bit by bit.
It was 8 weeks since Pete had his stroke, and a transition moving that quickly just was unprecedented, and it going as well as it did.
And so I knew Steph as a very quiet and a very reserved guy, someone who just got the job done. Whatever was asked of him, he did it. He did it diligently. He was a very hard worker. And so when he stepped into the role of leading NewGen, he had to find his voice. And he really did, and very quickly. And it's just because God has his hand on him and has a plan and a purpose for him for this time.
Initially, it was kind of like batten down the hatches and let's just survive this season. And I was just amazed to see all these little things that we'd set out to do initially fall into place. We didn't have leaders in place for Stellenbosch and Somerset West and Liberty, and it was just around kind of consolidating where we were at and finding the right people going forward for the future. And so to be honest, that first year was around surviving. I was just all over the place, completely stretched, and it was a testing time for us as a family.
We felt completely overwhelmed, and I think that was such a gift as well, because you can't possibly in your human capacity hold that kind of responsibility, and that was a great thing. That was a really great thing to know, because actually then you have to rely on God.
And it was just a massive learning curve. I don't think I've had to say sorry as much to the elders in that first year as since, you know.
And so Steph has won the hearts of the people. He is such a humble guy. I think through his humility, he has really drawn the church closer and close to him. And he is a strategist of note. Everything he does on purpose, for a purpose, because he knows where he's going. Like, what is quirky about him? He is just quirky, he's just quirky. He reminds me of Ross from Friends. Steph is a great adventurer. With him, everything is an adventure. And he is taking us on an adventure with God. All three of these guys have remarkable wives that really complement them. They are caring people. They love the people of the church, or God's people. They are nurturers. They are listeners, and they hear when people speak. So they really complement their husbands. They lead strongly alongside their husbands, and that for me is wonderful. And I just want to say to Una, I salute you. And to Jan, I salute you. And our newest mother of the house, Kaz, we salute you.
And at that stage, we were leading NewGen as a whole, and we didn't necessarily have leaders in Somerset West, Stellenbosch and Liberty, and we needed to figure that whole thing out. It was great joy and great relief when the hand of God settled on Glenn and Gregan to come and lead at Liberty. So grateful for that. And then bittersweet in a sense with Stellenbosch, where at some stage we thought we were going to be there for, I don't know, indefinitely. And just a very special place that Stellenbosch has held in our hearts all the years. realizing that it's not us, but then the sweetness of seeing God's hand settle on Paul and Kate and just having a real confidence and peace around that. And my heart in going forward and leading forward was to come and give freedom and ownership to the areas that they were leading in.
We were running kids' church gung-ho. Glenn, he was operations, so we were going full force. We had 4 kids at that stage. It was a crazy season. And then Glenn couldn't sleep at night. Something happened, and it was like a month where he would just wake up every night, and he didn't know what was waking him, and I just remember him just being kind of like anxious about something and just praying through the night. One day, on the way to work, he got out the car. He got into the car to leave and then got out and said to me, "I think we need to take over Liberty," at which I just burst into tears.
Life was a bit hectic at that time. And so any thought of any additional load for us was, I think, just way overkill. And so Steph was very gracious and said, actually for December, just take the whole month off, just go away, just you guys rest and relax. At that time of going on leave, just began to process it with God, so there wasn't any rush, there wasn't any pressure on us. By the end of that time away, Gregan came to me and said, actually God has now given me the burden for liberty as well.
I walked in there and God just showed me, instead of these cool kids that I was so kind of afraid of, in a sense I suppose, I just began to see their brokenness, and oh, my heart as a mom just started bleeding for them, and I felt God say to me from then, I just want you to love them, just love them.
And so it was really just a sweet moment of God synchronizing the call that He has for us, Him confirming it with both of us. And so we kind of duplicated that process, and each elder went away and prayed about liberty and came back all in agreement that actually they feel good in God for Greg's and I to take over leadership of Liberty. So we were prayed in 2014, and at that time just really felt God calling us to establish community kind of as the main thrust for the next 2 years. Just a real bonding of people, really beginning to hang out with each other, and our church becoming more than just Sunday meetings, and really doing life with one another. 2 areas that we have felt God moving us into as a community is family, and we also feel God nudging us toward being involved in the community. We just began to pray more and more for families and older folk. We began to see them joining Liberty, and so we have taken the foundations that Darby built, that Steph and Kaz put in, that Jared and Bron continued. We've built upon those foundations and are building Liberty into a community more and more as God is leading us and guiding us. It's nothing fancy. We really just are trying to learn every year how more and more to love God and to love others.
Before we came to NewGen, I felt like the Lord had told me that it was going to be 7 years under Pete's leadership. That was in 2006, and then in 2012, Paul was asked to come onto eldership. And I felt again the Lord speak to me and say that it was going to be about 2 years. Rigby was announcing to the leaders on a Tuesday night at prayer, and he just threw away a comment that was, I need you guys to know that Steph is not taking over on Sunday. When we announce it to everybody, he's taking over now. I thought, well, that's a funny thing to say. That was the 1st of October. 7 years to the day was the first time that we came to NewGen in October 2006. We were asked in, I think, September to consider taking over Stellenbosch leadership, and they just couldn't find it. Rigby couldn't get through until November. So it was November 2 years later that we took over Stellenbosch, and that for me has been God's incredible gift of I'm in this, you know. You can imagine a lot, Kate, but you can't make this stuff up.
Phillies was the unknown, and it's quite a scary moment leaving established friendships and going into a place where you're feeling insecure around having to lead and your leadership, but also you don't know the people. I think the vision at that time, particularly across our congregations, was really similar. So it felt like home. We just felt like we were kind of building on foundations which had already been laid.
Some of the miracles that we've seen, well, first of all, that people join us at all. Kind of feel like the kid in the playground, the popular kid comes up and says, can I come play with you? And you're like, are you sure?
We knew that God was calling us to lead a family church, and I think the reasoning for that is when you have a student town, there's so many people who are looking to be planted into families. I think one that's really shown me the power of partnering wider than just ourselves as well is around social justice. We launched Serve Stellies, and we're partnering with 6 or 7 organizations every year, and it's making significant strides, and we're seeing what God has brought about through people who are gifted in our community and are passionate about social justice.
He's brought the people to fill the opportunities that are already there. The parts in and of themselves are so small and seem insignificant to maybe ourselves, but then when we bring them together, it's like this beautiful sound. It's just, it's lovely.
Paul, Glenn and myself had grown up as brothers in the house with Pete, leading as a father, growing us and maturing us. And so Glenn and Paul were incredibly gracious to me at times as a brother, not even an older brother. I mean, Glenn's much older than me at the end of the day, you know. But just their grace to me was amazing. But at the same time, I had to recognize that there was stuff that God had put in their hearts and that He was bringing forth. And also the realization of multiplying out and the growth potential that we see exponentially more when we come and reproduce rather than hold on, you know. Where we get to plant out Stellenbosch and in time Liberty and reproduce after ourselves, and that's just so healthy. It really is. And so over time it became more and more aware, not from anything being forced, but just from the natural growth of the community, that we were moving more and more independently. And towards that end, a conversation began to crop up between Glenn, Paul and myself, and Glenn, Paul, myself and Stephen Rain, and we began to work things back and forth and ask questions, and it came to a point where we realized maybe part of the future was going to a place where we plant out. And we then went to the elders and we said, this is something that we've been looking at and that we feel that God could be doing. We want to propose going separately and planting out both Stellenbosch in the short term and Liberty into the future. And when you've prayed about it and when your thoughts and opinions are prayer filtered, come back and let's see what God's saying collectively. And when we came back and we sat down, we all collectively agreed that God was taking us in this direction.
Over the years, as we saw NewGen grow and different churches being planted, we couldn't contain everybody in one building. We can't expect Stellenbosch to be coming to Somerset West, but there's people to reach and a town to impact. Even though they're going, it is for the better. And in the going, they're going to be doing more and they're going to be reaching further. And they're going to have children and they're going to plant out children and release children. And so I just think it's a wonderful cycle of life. And so where we started as one church, growing into a few churches and now releasing again, kind of just being us, one church, but then with the potential of growing again, planting out and releasing again. And so it's an exciting thing.
The hugest take home for me has been watching the open-handedness with which Steph and Kaz have led us. There's a humility that underpins that. And that for me is by far the thing that I'm taking into our future, because I know one day I'm going to be the guy planting out and someone else is going to be the, you know, the hothead who's been me in this scenario, who's got these ideas and wants to do this or do that.
Trusting that as our churches go their way and begin to grow more and more, that we would really just keep that heart of ensuring that people are walking together, that community is important, that Jesus wants His people together to fellowship together and to grow and invest in each other's lives. And that is one of the great, I think, attributes of NewGen, and trusting that it will continue.
Just take this moment as well to thank NewGen, Somerset West, for all your love and effort you've put into us and our lives. It's bearing much fruit.
There's so much to be excited about in Somerset West. It's such a gracious, beautiful bunch of people and desperately hungry for God, and so it's evidenced in people coming on Sunday. We've just got so many people coming.
Those divisions which exist outside of church in our South African society seem to dissolve here.
And in the life of the church, we've seen people being baptized, we've seen people being healed, we've seen people being delivered from demons. We've seen our youth group growing, and just so much to celebrate and be stoked about in what God's doing in Somerset West.
God's power is manifested. God is lighting a fire that may burn with fervor in our lives, will cause us to get excited about God, will cause our hearts to burn so much inside of us that we can't keep it in. We have to share it. He's shaping, He's molding, He's blending us together as one for His purposes. The winds of change are blowing over NewGen and our surrounding areas, and you will be part of those winds that are blowing, because that's the Holy Spirit blowing through His church to bring about His plans and His purposes. We're going to explode numerically. This was His word. By His power, it spread out into surrounding areas, proclaim His gospel. Teams going out to other churches to help them, to build them, and to see God's power manifested through them. It should cause people's hearts to stir with thanksgiving, with praise, with glory and worshiping and glorifying God through these things that He's done and the things that He is doing in and through us at NewGen. Amen.